Okay, was there anything else anyone wanted to raise against this question?
This is something that you're proposing for the whole borough, though, isn't it? In terms of the 60/40 mix.
60/40 is the mayor's proposal.
That's right.
But so flexibility applied to that is something that you're proposing for the whole borough?
Yeah, once it's changed in the London plan, it's sort of moving towards that way, if it is indeed changed. I don't think we would attempt to have that percentage in until it was actually changed in the London plan. But that's what the mayor's indicated that he'd like to do.
So essentially you're saying that when the 60/40 ratio comes in, that your options are to either apply that to the whole borough or to certain areas of the borough. Sorry, the flexibility applied to that 60-40%.
I think
the issue is around the flexibility, isn't it, as opposed to the 60-40.
I think it's really a question whether, for the economic development area, you go beyond the normal tests of a planning application, where you always look at the individual circumstances, you always balance things against each other, you always look at viability issues for an individual planning application. But I think what we're looking at is there a special case to be made for the economic development area, as to being quite specific and saying, look, we're going to be far more flexible here. So we're going to go beyond the typical tests that you would use for a planning application. There's going to be a presumption in this area that we would be far more welcoming of intermediate housing, and we wouldn't try and perhaps peg the amount of intermediate housing down to the 40%. That's what the question's about, and that we would automatically offer greater flexibility in the economic development area as opposed to other parts of the borough.
I suppose it's understanding the extent of that flexibility to make it any different from the flexibility that you would apply in the rest of the borough, which is one of the proposals. Because essentially, what are the additional tests, I suppose, that you would apply to this area? And in terms of somebody coming forward with a percentage, what could they expect to get different in this part of the borough than they would in any other area? I suppose that's the question.
That's the whole point about flexibility, because it has to be done on a site-by-site basis, because you can't say in this massive area it should be X and be rigid about it. You've got to be flexible depending upon the peculiar circumstances of that particular location.
Did you want to add anything to it?
In terms of viability, it doesn't make a lot of difference, does it?
No.
Because you still got to do it.
You still have viability discussions. I mean, Westminster is a I'm trying to think of a good way of phrasing this. It's an easy borough to deal with, because the communications tend to be very, very good. We have, I think most of our members of the Westminster Property Association have very good relationships with Westminster. So we do have this open dialogue. I'm hesitant to say that not all boroughs are quite the same, but
we'd agree. That's been recorded.
I know, that's I'm slightly aware about this. But no, that's been the advantage of Westminster for a long time, that the communication lines are open, and so this flexibility, whether it's written down or not, has always been present. And as you say, that the ultimate decision rests with the planning committee and members. So, if the flexibility is built in the first place, and you can have this open dialogue, then at the end of the day, the planning process can always reject it if they don't like it. So I don't think you'll ever find anyone who actually says, no, we don't want flexibility.
In terms of, from our perspective, in terms of viability, we generally find that the higher the proportion of intermediate relative to social rent, the more viable it is for the developer to go forward.
As you said before, it's a proportion of grant that's available.
That may then come back to my point earlier on about, well, if there's more intermediate in the development, does that mean that intermediate has to be subsidised somehow, either through public subsidy or by the developer, so that the price is more affordable to local people?
Yeah, I think that's spot on.
But that's a slightly different. That's a very, very valid concern, a real problem that needs to be addressed. But it's, as you said, it's almost a case of a new product is needed.
Yeah, I think
really the whole structure needs to be addressed, rather than necessarily. The problem is we're trying to balance the 60-40 between two ends of the spectrum that aren't really ideal.
Yeah.
The problem is,
I think
the issue needs to be addressed in the middle with
I think there is a point though whereby if a development because of the tenure split is more financially viable for the developer, should we be looking to extract some other contribution from the developer to make that housing affordable, as well as perhaps going to organisations like the Homes and Communities Agency to subsidise it, and that's part of whatever that new product might be.
But that's as you say, that's I think where the flexibility comes in. It's by negotiation, effectively, it's the viability argument again, isn't it?
If you're basically saying that greater flexibility can be used to buy some greater viability and greater choice and greater variance in terms of products, then I think we'd have to say that's desirable. And again, I sort of echo from a Westbourne perspective the point. This is exactly the point that Marco has made.
And there is another aspect to it, and take there was a site next to St Mary's Hospital. It would be far more sensible, perhaps, to have a certain type of housing there rather than another type. But if we have absolute rigid rules, then we would actually shoot ourselves in the foot.
I think also to pick up on a lot of points, it seems to be that whatever policy approach we take and whatever options we take, we need some real clarity about if we do take a different approach in this area, about how the flexibility is different from a normal planning application flexibility, and what extra criteria you might apply to work on that flexibility. So I think that needs to be added to all of the options that we talk about that support a different tenure mix in that area.
I do think it's important that we have a good understanding of what we mean by intermediate housing, because Barbara made the point that there's no point in trying to achieve intermediate housing if it's not affordable for people in current social housing. Because the aim is that you'll be able to attract them onto the property ladder.
Yeah.
So this fundamentally goes to the why, which would guide the flexibility, the extent of the flexibility.
Yeah.
And what seems to be coming across is the mobility. Things that facilitate mobility.
Will it be necessary to take account of the peculiar situation we have in the housing market at the moment, which will go on for a year, 2 years, in planning for now?
I think really we're trying to write sort of policies that are more long-term, and so they need to apply at this point in time. They certainly need to apply with the current economic situation the way it is. But they also need to apply beyond that, but when things pick up again and that. So we've been quite careful. We've tried to be careful about how we've written our policies to make sure that they apply over a range of economic cycles and through recessions and boom times and that as well. Okay.
I don't know if you're going to try and summarise that, because I think there's actually quite a
We are. Sarah's taking a very detailed note, so I think we've actually got about good for Sarah. Her probably brain is scrambling at the moment. But I think certainly I've noted down at least 6 different points that vary from each other, and certainly we'll get those out, and that's how we plan to take it forward. So there are differences of opinion, and so your people can put their names against which options they support.
I'm not sure about differences of opinion. It's actually sort of irreconcilable differences. I mean, if the need is for family housing, for example, and larger units are going to be absolutely unaffordable. I mean, if in fact what is going to be available viability will mean that they're going to be the smaller units, which is not where the pressure is. There's sort of conflicting needs.
Well, I think what we'll do, we'll try and capture those, and certainly we'll circulate all the information, and you can feedback if hopefully we capture it correctly, what you've said, but also there's an opportunity for you to come back and say, well, that wasn't quite what I meant, or it doesn't really reflect what I was saying. So I think. But
I can see that as far as planning is concerned, if we talk about total flexibility, we're lost.
Well, yeah. Yeah, and I think they'll need to, if we do agree on a certain stance, if it does include any amount of flexibility, I think there'll need to be a further discussion about what those criteria might be and how they might apply, and the sort of detail about what the policy might look like, if that's the option we go down. If we agree that there's no additional flexibility, then that's not won't matter.